All right, let's get started. First off, come on, settle down. First off, are there any questions? Yes.
I'm waiting on my computer to do a bunch of updates, so.
Okay.
I'm not gonna interrupt this, I'm just saying, I don't know what to do right now.
Remember, the whole lecture, the video will be posted, so you'll have the whole thing.
Class though, maybe I should talk to you, because every time I come to campus, I have a problem with the Wi-Fi with my laptop.
Okay.
I don't know what it is.
I don't know what it is either. All right. Yeah. Oh, guys, quiet down.
I was working on the table, homework you gave us, and code is not generating.
Code is not generating on your computer.
I was trying to install it, and nothing was showing up. Flag.
See me either in office hours or after. We'll take a look. All right. So today, other questions? Quick. Cool. So today we're going to talk about a few different things. Basically talking about getting data in and out of the database. So last week, the week before, we looked at using insert statements in SQL. Now, that's fine if you have a small amount of data that you want to insert. However, if you have 1,000 records or 10,000 records or 1,000,000 records, writing the insert statements for that is really not going to be practical. Okay, so we need to talk about other ways that that we can do this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of start up our tool chain here. So let me go to XAMPP, run the control panel. So I'm going to start up, well, it labels it as, of course it does label it as MySQL, although in reality it's MariaDB. I'm also going to start up Apache because we are going to talk a little today about using phpMyAdmin. Okay, so both of those are green. Again, remember, so Apache is a web server. So once we run that, you're basically hosting your own website right on your computer, right? So for instance, if I click the admin button here for Apache, you'll see it takes me to localhost/dashboard and tells me all the stuff about Apache. Right? It probably should show. Let me just go ahead and stop that quick. Right. So if that isn't running, I go ahead and try to reload this. And nothing, right? So Apache is what gives us that functionality. Yes?
Just to just to remind anybody, some applications might use the port Apache might use. For example, I have VMware installed on my laptop, so
yeah, if you
just close the program and try to start it again.
There you go.
Close the process.
So the other thing, notice there's an admin button on the for the row for MySQL as well. Okay, and I think we talked about this before. It opens up phpMyAdmin. Okay, so PHP, for those who don't know, it's a web scripting language. You can create dynamic web pages, and PHP was designed to play very nicely with MySQL/MariaDB. So it actually interacts very nicely for that, and PHP is one of the more popular web frameworks out there. Some estimates say you're looking at upwards of 70 to 80% of websites are using PHP as their back end. You can explore the databases, you can explore your tables, right? So notice if I come over to first here, which is the database that we had originally created, there's our parrots table. I can click on that. Notice going to browse for this, it actually shows me there's all the records that we had inserted there. It shows things like the SQL that I would type for actually making that happen on my own. We can look at the structure of the database, or I'm sorry, of the table. Clicking on the SQL tab here, this allows me to actually, like we can do in dbeaver, it'll allow me to run general SQL queries and statements and so forth. So there's our select star from parrots, and I'll go ahead and click go, and yep, there's our results. Ooh-ah. What phpMyAdmin is going to allow us to do is to dump the contents of either tables and or databases themselves. Okay, so if you have a database in something like MySQL or MariaDB, you can use phpMyAdmin to very easily get that data out of the database. And the format that you can get out of, the format that you can use for getting it is actually customizable. Right. So, for instance, if I go to export here, right, we get the export page. I don't have any existing templates or anything like that. You'll notice we have the option for quick versus custom, and then here's the format section. Right. So these are all the different formats that it will output your data in for you. Right. So CodeGen, CSV, Microsoft Word, JSON, LaTeX, etc. Since this class predominantly is about SQL, we'll do an output to SQL. Right. So if I click that, click go, notice it creates a file called parrots.sql and it automatically downloads it. Again, PHP is a web app, so it's just going to download it. If I go to my downloads folder itself, here is parrots.sql. Right. So if we open up that in Notepad++, this is what it looks like. Now, a couple of things about this. First, because of what I had selected when I did the export, namely I had the table selected, not the database, it has only output the data for this particular, for that particular table, and not the database itself. If you want the entire database, you can certainly get that exported as well. So notice I'm just going to click on the database here, and then again go back over to export. Just leave all the options as they are. And so it creates now first.sql, notice the name of the database. And again, we can take a look at the contents. Okay. So the contents look a bit like the computer has just vomited up random characters. Before you run screaming, it's really pretty manageable. Again, remember that the double dash stands for a comment, right? So as far as SQL is concerned, that stuff doesn't matter at all. We could actually delete that and it would be just fine. Some of these other statements here, these are largely related to MySQL in general. So you wouldn't necessarily have the same types of stuff if we were using a different database backend. It does have some comments about the fact that the database is called first. However, notice it didn't actually export any of the creation of the database, and we'll come back to that in a minute. And then, of course, we have our structure for the individual tables. So here's the parrots table, and there's the actual data itself. Okay. So to be able to have this generate the appropriate create database statement, we're going to have to use the custom option. Right, so when we go to custom, notice, little scroll down, it'll show us all of the tables in the database. Right now we only have one table, namely the parrots table. But notice we could actually, we can select whether we want the structure, whether we want the data. In this case, we want both. We have a number of other options in terms of namings of the files and so forth. If we scroll down, let's see, where is it? All the way down to, yeah, here, object creation options. Here's the option that we want, add create database / use statement. Okay, so this will add in, as it suggests, it will put in the create database statement along with the use statement, so that way the database itself is created right along with the tables and so forth. Okay. All right, so let's try that. I'll go ahead and click go. So once again, we'll skip past all the nasty bits. Here's the create database statement, right? So they add in an additional clause that checks to make sure that the database exists. One note on the back ticks or the back quotes. This isn't part of the SQL standard. This is simply MySQL, using that to make sure that to disambiguate against other types of reserved words. So for instance, if I wanted to create a table or a database called database, then in MySQL what I could do is, while I couldn't have just create database name database, what I would do is put that inside the back quotes, and then it would allow me to create a database with that name. Not necessarily recommended to use the keywords of SQL for that, but that's really why that's there. And then they have some additional stuff again that we can choose to ignore. There's the use statement. Again, just like we saw previously, and then we have our appropriate create statement, right, that creates all of this stuff. So we have our name, we have species, we have our age values, and then our inserts themselves. Okay. Questions about that much? Now, what's nice about this, question, Josh?
Yeah, I was gonna say, how'd you get to that table?
How did I get to which? Right, so remember, all I did was, I did the export by clicking go, and that gave me this file here, this first SQL. And so all I did is just open that up in Notepad++. Right, you can use really whatever editor, etc. Notepad++ is kind of handy for this type of thing. Okay. The plus side of this is that since it's exporting basically raw SQL, what that means is this is a very convenient way to be able to then transfer your data to other machines. So for instance, if I wanted to give a copy of my database to all of you, what I could do is simply hand you this file, and once we then look at how you can actually import based off of this file, then you would have an exact copy of my database, right? Similarly, it's good for doing backups of databases, for transferring to different production machines, all of those kinds of things. So again, pretty handy way of doing it. Not necessarily the most concise way of doing it, right? I mean, notice we do have a lot of verbiage. We do have all the inserts and so forth. But nevertheless, it is complete and it will get the job done. Okay. So once you have such a file, then the question becomes, well, how do you actually import it, right? So the first thing I'm going to do, let me come over to my database here. So here's the first database, and let's see, I do want to delete this. I think I can do this here, and yep, there it is. Right, delete table. So we'll say go ahead and drop the entire thing. Right, enable for, yeah, sure, why not? Okay, so that got rid of that. What I really want is the database itself. Okay, fine. When GUI tools fail you, resort to straight up SQL. Drop database first. There we are. So table's gone, database is gone, basically a blank slate, so to speak. All right, so just as there's an export button, there's an import button. No database selected. Yes, that's fine. Let me see. Thought there was a way. Structure. There we are. Yes, had to move back out to the top level. this page seemed to think it was still working with that particular database. All right. Now, clicking import basically gives us this. Notice there's the option right here for selecting the file that you're interested in. Right, so I'll go ahead and select that. And let's see. Here's the proper first SQL that also creates the database itself. So I can click and select that. Then we'll go down. And yes, we are using SQL. And let's go ahead and click go. Okay. And so it runs through, basically talks about all the stuff it did. And notice once again, there's the first database. There's parrots. All of our stuff has been imported. Okay. Questions, issues, etc. Right, fairly straightforward. Okay. What I should note is the manner in which you go about exporting data and importing data into the databases is not largely standardized. Okay, so that is, there's not a standard SQL way to say load the following data or export or do a data dump. Generally, the various database engines select or have their own sort of method for doing that. So this method works very nicely within phpMyAdmin, tied together with MySQL. However, if we were using something like SQLite or SQL Server, etc., then the method would in fact be different. All right. Okay. Now, as I said, this method of sharing data is fantastic. It's fantastic in the sense that, again, it's just raw SQL. We can dump the data. We get the data dump itself. We can import it. You might have seen that there is actually a size option. So if your database is too big, then you're actually going to have some issues using the import method. The file has to be within a particular size. The problem is, in the real world, so to speak, most of the time, that's not what you have available to you, right? And again, this is something that I feel very passionate about making sure that you understand. My undergraduate degree, incidentally, is not in computer science. My undergrad degree is in psychology and philosophy. Okay. And as part of that, so I had to take a statistics class. And when you take statistics, they show you all of these very nice, cleaned up data. That is, data that fits all of the assumptions, and it meets it has the nice distribution and everything is absolutely wonderful. And you can plug that into the formulae, and everything just works. The problem is, in reality, in the real world, your data is almost never that way. How many people have heard the term big data? Right. So this idea of big data, it's the fact that there is tons and tons of data being collected from systems. Imagine any popular website. Every single request that comes in for that website, for every single page, for every single asset on the page and all of that, that generates a log entry. So if you have a popular website, that's a lot of data that's actually getting generated. And being able to then analyze that, to be able to do things like optimize advertising and so forth, right, requires being able to deal with those huge amounts of data. In that case, you're probably just looking at log streams and all of that. But you might also then be looking at sort of where else people are clicking through and so forth, and some other things that are happening. Are they adding stuff to shopping carts? All of those kinds of things. In that case, what you're now starting to deal with are probably multiple data sources as well. So I'll have the source for the log files. I'll have some additional information, probably from a database that keeps track of their shopping cart, of their purchases, all of those types of things. And now I need to sort of combine all of that information together for my analysis. In big data, roughly 85% of your work is in what's called ETL. ETL stands for extraction, transformation, and loading. So 85% of the work that you're going to put in has nothing to do with the analysis of the data or getting all of that sort of juicy information out of it. 85% of your work is grunt work. Extraction of the data, that is getting it out of whatever source, whatever initial source it comes from. Does it come from a database? Does it come from a log file, etc.? Transformation, because once I actually get that data in some particular form, I'm probably going to have to then manipulate the data so that it's in another form so that I can use that for my own analyses. And then finally, loading of the data, that is taking all of that transformed data and loading that into a system that will allow me to do my analyses and so forth. 85% of the work, right? So simply showing you nice, neat examples where everything is happy kind of misses a lot of the point, okay? And so that's why it's really important that we kind of talk about these issues. So as I said, most of the time it's the case that the data that you have isn't going to be this kind of raw data dump in this nice SQL format. Okay. So what do you get? Well, in the worst possible case, the worst possible case is you get a printout. Printout is absolutely horrible because then you've got to figure out how to do some OCR to get that to basically read all of that data back in, or hopefully you have a team of interns that you're going to make type all of that stuff in. So that's probably fundamentally the worst part, just getting a printout. Second worst, PDF files. Anybody tried to extract data from PDF files? It totally sucks. Right? It's doable, but it ain't easy, it ain't fun, it's kind of a mess. Again, depending on the PDF file, hopefully you have PDF that actually has text. In that case, you can use certain tools that sort of convert it from a PDF into a raw text document. Otherwise, again, you're going to use some OCR solution, various other things, and all of that. Very commonly are CSV files, right? So I touched on this briefly before. I just kind of wanted to show you some various examples of CSV files, right? So here's a CSV file. We're actually going to use this today. We're going to look at how to load this up. You'll notice that for the class, generally I'll have the code and the various data files and so forth set up in Gist. What's nice about it is that Gist, which is a product of GitHub, it does things like syntax highlighting. So if you have, for instance, a SQL file, it highlights the keywords and all of those kinds of things. In the case of CSV files, notice the default view is this very nice little tabular type of view, right? Now, in reality, the data doesn't look like this at all, right? So if I go to the raw view here, that's literally what the data looks like, okay? It's a plain text file, and each of the columns are separated by a comma, right? So there's instructor name column, we have a comma, followed by the course, right? That's the format. Now, there are some additional types of features that sometimes that are commonly used. They're not sort of part of the formal specification for CSV, but nevertheless, they are common. Where did I click? There we go. For downloading these, you can do this a couple of different ways. Notice, you can download a zip file. That's really handy if I have a gist where I have multiple files and you just want to get all of them at the same time. On the other hand, you can do something like go to the raw view. I could certainly select all of this and then copy and paste it into a text editor. Generally what I tend to do is I'm just going to right click on raw and do save link as, and then that will give me the option for saving that file, right? So there I go, it goes to downloads. Opening that up in Notepad++, there we get the raw view itself. right? And most spreadsheet programs will allow you to open up CSV files as well to get that, that very common columnar look to them, right? So there again is that file opened up. But again, while Excel opens it, if you have Excel installed on your machine, by default it sets an association to be able to open these files. It really isn't an Excel file proper. Excel files themselves have additional data in them for handling a whole host of different features. Yes.
Now, there was this one point, I think after Office 2007 or so, that Office files are now just basically XML files.
Yes, right, with the doc, all of the ones that have the extra X in them, right? So the docx, for instance, is an XML file. But again, that's going to look very, very different than this. It's going to be way more verbose. XML sucks, frankly. It's horrible. All right. So there's a very common format. Let me show you a couple of other examples of CSV files that I have. Yeah, I don't need that anymore. So I have this one here. This actually was basically based off of this College Humor post. Right, 7 problems only girls who have killed before will understand, right? So number 1, you can't date cops, right? There it has all this, right? So again, you can kind of see how this is set up. So we have a field for the number, we have the headline itself, and then we have the additional text for that particular entry. Okay, let me go ahead and download this. So CSV files, a couple of things. Typically, honestly, when I get a CSV file, the first thing I do is just open it up in Excel. It's much easier to look at and all of that. But I did actually want to kind of point out something here. So take a look on this, on what is the last column here, right? So notice I have this beginning double quote for "it's not like the police are going to catch you," blah, 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 right? If I open this up in Excel, notice, I don't have the double quotes around that. Okay. Now, what's going on? Anybody know?
Yes, interpreting as a string, so you have commas between the string and it's row CSV.
Yeah, that last little point. So take a look. Right here, catch you, comma, space. So remember, if we're using commas to separate our fields, then any occurrence of a comma means literally separate the field. However, this is one whole field all by itself. In fact, I think there are actually probably, yeah, there's another comma in there, and you can kind of see. Now, the way that CSV files get around this, and again, it's not part of the standard for CSV files, but it is a very common, to see this in CSV, is that they will put double quotes around the field itself that contains commas. And therefore then, while the double quotes themselves are not part of the data, they serve to say, okay, this entire thing, including commas, is a single field. All right, makes sense. Good. Notice this one here. Never have I ever. So what does that look like? Right. So there are double quotes that are part of the string itself. The way that those then get set up is as such. So you'll see these repeated double quotes in the string itself. Right. So a way of escaping a double quote, if you will. What I like about this example as well is, remember, so we see this on the website, etc. Right, here's the website itself. Now I don't know, this may or may not be a static page, but it does kind of give you an idea of how one would begin to store data for dynamically generated websites, right? Remember, most of the websites that you're going to deal with are not static content. Instead, what you have is a bunch of your data sitting inside a database someplace, and ultimately what the back end of the system does, whether it's written in PHP or Java or .NET or whatever, is that it's going to extract the data from the appropriate table, get that data, and then reformat that in terms of HTML to display it for you. Okay? Bolting web pages on top of databases. Here's another one. Slide 2. So notice, this file, URL categorization dfe.csv. So it's a 5 megabyte file, which at that point GitHub is not even going to try to display all of that data on the web page, right? It basically just says, okay, yeah, here's the file. We're not showing you all of that. If you want it, download it. Just real quick to kind of take a look at that. Yes, that's a mess. Let me save link as. So this data set is basically used with some machine learning algorithms to ultimately categorize or come up with categories for different types of websites. And so you can see, just to give you an idea, there are 31,086 records. So a few records. Right, definitely more than what we would want to use for writing the insert statements themselves. Now, again, if I wasn't dealing with something like MySQL, if there wasn't some other easier way of loading that in, I probably actually wouldn't. I wouldn't certainly type out 31,000 insert statements. Right, I'm not going to work that hard. I'm a state employee after all. Right. More importantly, I'm a programmer, and remember that one of the cardinal virtues of programmers is laziness, right? So most likely what I would probably do is write a program that actually scans through this file and then generates the insert statements for doing just that, the transform of ETL, right? And then I could feed that into the appropriate program, etc. Okay. Kind of figuring out, notice there's a bunch of things with lots of zeros in here, various subcategories, some tourism, airline, bunch of different things, right? At least this cluster of tourism there. Yeah. Okay. So lots of data. One of the other things that becomes kind of interesting, especially when you're dealing with public data sources or data sources acquired via things like Freedom of Information requests or Sunshine Law requests, is being able to get the data catalog. That sort of shows you, here's what all of these particular columns mean and all of that, sort of beginning to wrap your head around what type of data you're looking at and so forth. One of the things that becomes very important, again, because when we're getting these data sets, and a lot of times these data sets are generated by humans, it's entirely possible there are going to be plenty of errors in the data sets themselves. So generally you want to start sort of looking through to see if you see odd values in different in different sections. right? So, so I see a whole bunch of zeros in this column, then I see a 0.3, right? There's a 0.2. Okay, so that gives me kind of a sense of that. On the other hand, if as a, right, you'll notice these other columns, for instance, there's a column where it has newspaper in one, magazines in another, right? If I happen to see a bunch of zeros and 0.3s, and then I happen to also see in this column something saying newspaper, then I'd kind of wonder what's going on with that. That's sort of weird about how they'd be storing that data. I'm not quite sure if that's an error or what's quite going on. Certainly when you're dealing with numbers too, you want to kind of get a sense of the range and so forth. Later on, we'll look at some other tools to kind of make some of these things easier, where the tool itself can kind of analyze the data to say, okay, for this particular column, they're all numbers, here's roughly the range of numbers. Again, ranges of numbers are really important. So as we're looking through here, again, I tend to be seeing things that are 0 or less than 1, right? I'm not seeing stuff that is much beyond that. So if I happen to see a number like 300 in there, again, I'd kind of be worried about what exactly is going on with that, whether that's an error and so forth. All right. One of my good friends, former student of mine actually, and when I first met her, she told me her job was a data journalist. Anybody heard of a data journalist before? Yeah, I hadn't either. So a data journalist, they are journalists, they write news stories and so forth, but they basically go about that by making requests like Freedom of Information requests, or making requests, especially in Florida under the Sunshine Laws, for various data sets from public organizations, right? So from the government, et cetera. So one data set that she gave me, I'll just kind of show this quickly. Here it is. So, a couple of things. If we take a look at, we can see these are actually listed as TSVs. TSV basically is similar to CSV, except instead of commas, we're using tabs to separate the data itself. Now, this data is actually from a project that I helped her with, that ultimately ended up getting one Florida official fired, and a number of new laws basically put in place. What the issue that was going on was, in the state of Florida, if you're a sex offender, if you're accused of rape and so forth, and you go to jail for this, when it's time to release you, there's a board that evaluates how likely it is the case that you're going to reoffend. And if they think that it's likely that you're going to reoffend, then they will Baker Act you into a treatment program. So the Baker Act in Florida allows the state to ultimately have you put into a mental institution against your own will. Right, if you're a threat to yourself or others, minimally they can keep you for 72 hours. It can go on longer than that, etc. And so in that case, they would use the Baker Act to force them into treatment centers and so forth. So my friend basically started making some requests to get the actual data of sex offenders going back a number of years, and wanted to start to look at the number of individuals who reoffended. So in the period that she was looking at, they found over 400 individuals who reoffended, some within a month of being released, some actually the next day, etc. right? So clearly the system saying that people were not going to reoffend was not working. The Florida legislature got involved with this. They were very unhappy with what was going on with the program. The guy that actually ran the program lost his job over it. Another person resigned, and then ultimately the Florida legislature basically made some other changes to these things. So you can kind of see, right? Here's the database itself, right? So we can see here's the tabs themselves that are separating the individual fields, right? And so we have this list of offenders. We can see kind of when they were released, various stuff about their date of birth. There's also URLs here for their mugshots. Apparently in the newsroom, it actually became kind of interesting. It became kind of a game to play to find out, to try to figure out, are you dealing with a sex offender or a pedophile, right? So you just kind of hold up two pictures, like which one's the pedophile, which one, yeah, gallows humor, I know. All right, but nevertheless, again, data sources that we find ourselves having to deal with. And this one has a mere 56,048 records. Okay. All right. Cool. Okay. So now that we've seen a bunch of different data sources and all of those things, and kind of trivial data sources versus not so trivial data sources and all of that, let's take a look at how we can then take something like a CSV file and load that into MySQL. Okay. Now for this, I don't actually need to use phpMyAdmin. I'm just going to go ahead and do this straight up within dbeaver. So let's see, make sure we're connected. Yep. Let me go ahead and get a new SQL editor, new script. There we are. Okay. And what we're going to start with is the instructor. Oops. Go back to our very simple instructor database, right? So this database only has two columns, basically the name of the instructor and a particular course, right? So it has myself and this course. It has Professor Hidalgo teaching COP 2512. I don't know if she's teaching that this semester. Professor Gaspar teaching COP 2513, right? So three records, a little header, all of that. Let's see what we have to do to kind of get this stuff loaded up, okay? Obviously, the first thing is that we want to create a table for that data. So I can have something like create, actually let me make sure, use first, all right, execute that. So I'm just going to use that same database. Create table, and so, I don't know, let's call it teaching. So, as we saw, first one is the name of the instructor, so I want to give all of my columns meaningful names, just the same way as in regular programming you want to choose meaningful names for your variables. So I'll use insert underscore name. I'm going to make that a varchar, and I'm going to say, let's make it 15. I happen to know that all of the last names will fit in within that particular space. Then the course, okay, and again, so if we take a look at the course, all the courses here, notice they have a 3-letter prefix, a space, and then 4 digits for the actual course. If you look at the Florida state course numbering system, it's possible for there to be at least one other letter after this. In some cases, I believe there's actually a possibility of 2 letters following that. So we do kind of want to be aware of that. So this is 3, 4, right? So that's 8. All right. So So let's say the 8 plus the possibility of two additional characters, and that would be good. If, on the other hand, and just as a point of this, if I knew that all of my courses were going to be exactly this format, that is 3 letters, a space, followed by 4 digits, then in that case it would probably make a lot more sense for me to do something like this. Oops. Char 8, right? What's the difference between varchar and char? What is it?
Char is restricted the number of characters you specify. That number of characters at all.
Exactly. So the difference between varchar and char is the var. Var stands for variable, right? So that is variable length character string, right? Versus char, which is a fixed size. So char is saying, okay, we're going to, in the case of char 8, we're saying we're always and only going to have 8 characters. As we said, we want to allow for the possibility of those other things, so we'll do this. Okay, so there, our table is in fact created. Let's go ahead and take a look. Right, there's the teaching table, and right now there should not be any data in it, right? I didn't show this last time, but I guess I will show it here. If you go to ER diagram, it shows you this little diagram of your tables for the database. So there it is, right? It's the teaching table. It has 2 fields, kind of neat. Okay. I have down here the a link to the documentation page for MariaDB, right? So here's everything you never wanted to know about MariaDB. And so you can see they kind of have built-in functions broken down into things. They also have a search option. And I happen to know that the command I want is load data in file, right? Let's see. Here's load data in file. Let's take a look at what this documentation looks like. Now, I show you this not to scare you off. Look, it definitely is very, very ugly. And here's the sort of meaning behind these things, right? The stuff that's inside square brackets are optional. Okay. So here, where they have low priority and or bar or concurrent, what they're basically saying is I could have none of those there. That is, not use low priority, not use concurrent, or I could use one or the other of those. So I could say low priority, I could say concurrent. Notice we also have optional the local name, and then in file is going to be there, followed by the file name itself, right? And so forth. So it kind of gives you an idea of how to read these things, and basically being able to kind of understand this little brief syntax will definitely go a long way to helping you. The other thing is that if that's kind of too much to look at, you can go to this page here, which shows a number of different examples of using load data in file for loading different types of data and so forth, right? So here's examples and all of that, and they kind of, and again, it's a good read, good reference. Okay, so back over to here. So I need to do a load data in file. And then I need the full path to wherever my file happens to exist, right? So in this case, my file's in my downloads folder, and it's called inster-classes.csv. So that should be in C:\users\pventura downloads inster classes dot CSV. Okay. If we refer back to the documentation, right, so notice we have load data, we have INFILE, we have our file name, and then the next part that is not optional is the into table. Essentially, we need to specify what table we're going to load the data into. Oops, still in the into table, and what do we call it? Teaching. Again, referring back, notice everything else is optional, so let's try it. All right, so we're going to go ahead and run this, and it dies a horrible death. Welcome to computer programming. Now, let's take a look at some of this stuff, right? So it says, okay, execution failed, reason, SQL error file, right? It says no such file or directory. Okay, so that could possibly mean that I screwed up the path or something like that. If I take a close look at the path, notice it says C:\users, pventura, desktops, right? So right away, this first part of the path is totally off. And then the actual path that I had, notice, is missing my backslashes. Anybody know what's going on?
It's expecting the final one of these.
Right. So backslashes are special characters. In fact, backslashes generally are an escape character. So for instance, if I wanted to write the new line character in a string, I would do \n. If I wanted a tab character, I would do \t. So since a backslash has a special meaning, basically I need some way of escaping the backslash. Okay. And the way of doing that, oops, is to double them, right? So \\/ means this is just a backslash. Hey, I don't make the rules, I just teach them. All right. Incidentally, if that just hurts your sensibilities, it turns out that actually you can get away with using /, these sort of Linux-style /, and that would work out just fine as well. Okay, so let me go ahead and run this. And we get an error. Okay. Still doesn't work, right? But good news, it's a different error. Okay, so data too long for column inster name at row 1. Okay, well that's kind of weird. Let me do this. Oh, incidentally, I meant to show this the other day. dbeaver does not like extra vertical white space. So for instance, doing this, no. Okay? Yep. So be careful about that. All right, I think I can comment that out. So let me just make this larger, let's say about 40. Okay. So now my table has a single column. And let me go ahead and load this whole thing. And now notice, victory. So let's take a look. So in the inster name column, in fact, which is now the only column that I have for that particular table, I get both the instructor name and the course itself. Okay. Now, what's going on here is the fact that I need to tell MySQL that we're dealing with a comma-separated file. I go back, we had 15 there. Let's drop the table. Oh yes, I'm missing a comma. Ha. All right. So there's our table once again. Notice, since we dropped the table, we shouldn't have any data in there, which we don't. Okay. So up here, again, referring back to this, we can see that we have this section here. So I can say fields or columns terminated by some particular string. Just like so. Okay, so let's try that. Run that, notice, no errors. Let's take a look. And there they are. Now, the only little issue with this is that the first row is basically the names in the from the file of the individual columns, right? So getting those out, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can do it with the load statement, but that's going to be left as an exercise in one of your homework assignments for you. The easiest way of doing that, if you really don't want it, is just delete that particular row. And again, let me go ahead and drop this table. And there it is. Okay. Questions, issues, etc. Yes? Select star from teaching, right? Oh, can you delete rows from SQL? Yes, we just haven't talked about it yet. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm hearing you. Just come up after class. Oh, yeah. Select star from teaching basically says the star means all of the columns, right? And then from the table. Okay. Now what we're going to see, in fact, actually, your next reading assignment will be reading chapter 2. We're also going to see that there's additional things that we can do within the select statement to narrow down the particular records that we're going to get. Okay. And also narrow down the column. So just to give you for instance, I could do this. Right? So this says select just the instername column from teaching. Cool. Throw away the other column. Exactly. Exactly. Okay. All right. Yep. Yeah, so assuming I had other columns in this, I could do that. Right, and then that would only give me those two columns, and any of the other columns would be thrown away. Okay. Yep. All right. See you guys next time.